This is going to be more of a new product session here. You know, we've been waiting for new products for the last while. I'm sure a lot of you have been anticipating, of course, you know, hearing about new Minn Kota motors and all that. This really is the year for Minn Kota when it comes to the product releases. Obviously, with a lot of the stuff that we've been dealing with the last 3 years, keep in mind, I mean, this whole brushless thing in Minn Kota, the Quest, you know, they've had this technology for a little while now, and just around the time that, you know, we were looking to release it, well, what happened? You know, the world gets hit with COVID, and last thing you want to do is release a product line and not be able to ship it, right? So here we are right now, some new products coming down the road. Some pretty major changes when you look at the Minn Kota offering. Top to bottom, as long as I've been with the brand, this is the biggest changes that I've ever seen, you know, with Minn Kota as a company overall. So we're going to talk about some of these changes. I'm actually going to go into a little bit of a refresher for some of the Humminbird products, give you a sneak peek of some of the things down the road. I'm sure it's no secret that some of you might have heard with the Lakemaster survey crew doing some mapping up here and that sort of thing last year. So there's some neat things coming down the road when it comes to Lakemaster VX mapping too. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but let's talk about the motors right now, okay? You might have heard about Quest trolling motors, right? That's the Minn Kota series, the brushless series, whether it's the Tarova, there's the Tarova, and then the Tarova Quest, the Ultrex, Ultrex Quest, Altera, Ultrex, or Altera Quest. Those are the brushless series, but the non-brushless series motors have also been updated. One of the biggest things you'll notice is that iPilot and iPilot Link as we know it are no more. They've been replaced by the new enhanced GPS system, okay? So different system, different remote, it's all basically been merged into one. One of the things that happens when you look at iPilot, which is a great system, it's completely independent of your Humminbird unit, right? It's your wireless remote, your steering, your speed, your spot lock, eye tracks, that sort of thing. If you want to take that functionality and connect it to your Ethernet compatible Humminbird unit, that's where iPilot Link comes in, right? But they're two separate systems. So now it's actually been merged into one, and I'll show you that in some of the following slides. The other thing is that any of the cables that you need to connect your Minn Kota trolling motor to your Humminbird unit, those cables actually come on the box, right? So your Ethernet adapter cable, your Ethernet cable, your 14-pin to 9-pin, that sort of thing. So there's some added value in a simplified system when you look at connecting your Minn Kota trolling motor to your Humminbird. Okay, so that's a pretty significant update, is that even the non-Quest Minn Kota motors are using the new enhanced GPS. So when you look at iPilot, for example, there's a previous remote right there. There's the previous iPilot Link remote. This is the new system. Completely different design, better ergonomics, better design. These buttons that you see here at the bottom, these are the One Boat Network buttons. One Boat Network adds functionality to whatever you want to designate for that function. Actually, the default on number one, if I'm not mistaken, is actually the new drift mode. And we'll talk about that a couple slides from now. Let's say you've got a pair of talons on the back of your boat and you want to designate that to stow and deploy your talons. You have that option as well too. The other nice thing is that these actually take AA batteries, so you can find those anywhere. So a new remote, a new system, both in the micro and the full-size wireless remote. Also been simplified when you look at the apps. Previously, you have your iPilot app, your iPilot Link app, you've got your Talon, your Raptor, your Fish Smart chart app. Now everything goes into one single app, the One Boat Network app. So you want to use your wireless remote for your trolling motor, it's on the app. Eventually, you know, as there's going to be maps out in the Saskatchewan area down the road, it's all on the chart settings, you know, in the One Boat Network app. So one app that basically controls them all. So a lot more streamlined in terms of the functionality in the design. So pretty cool. Here's a great feature. You know, when we add features, whether it's, you know, follow the contour and eye track and all these sorts of things, this is another added feature. This is the new drift mode in the enhanced GPS. Basically what drift mode is you set your drift path, you can control your drift speed, you can control the angle of the boat. So it's kind of like having an electronic drift sock, right? You can break out the drift socks and you can drift along with the wind, but you don't really have a lot of control as far as your specific path and making adjustments, but also your speed. Maybe you're drifting too slow, maybe you're drifting too fast. This is a great thing with the new drift mode, is that you actually have control over that drift as well as the boat angle and how you're actually drifting. So this is a great feature. Even the dodge feature with follow the contour If you're following a particular contour, this will be a great thing when we start getting mapping out this way, or even if you're using it on the AutoChart live contours. Well, if you have a boat further up ahead and you're following a particular contour, well, what you got to do previously is you got to disengage and then you reset your follow the contour feature after you get around that obstacle or boat. Well, the dodge feature is great, is that basically what you're going to do is you're going to suspend your follow the contour and then it'll reinitiate itself once you navigate around that. So a lot of cool features. I'm sure there's going to be some neat things coming down the road, but this is one of the new features, the new drift mode. Dual spectrum chirp. I think you already know what chirp sonar is, right? That frequency spectrum, as opposed to our standard dual beam 83/200 kilohertz. Chirp sonar is a frequency spectrum. All of the Humminbird units are basically running chirp sonar now. So on your trolling motor, as opposed to where we had our universal sonar 2 or US2 transducer, all of the transducers now on the trolling motors are running DSC or dual spectrum chirp. So effectively what that means is that the US2 connector goes away. Everything's being updated to the 14-pin connector right now. Obviously there's more features, functionality, utilizing chirp sonar and the transducer. So this is an actual Humminbird high, wide, low Q chirp. So you've already got a chirp Humminbird unit. Why would you limit yourself with just standard dual beam, right? You want to take advantage of that chirp sonar at the transducer source, not just processing chirp sonar in the sonar head. As I mentioned with some of the units that have the cables in the box, this basically shows here with the Mega DI, the DSC trolling motors, the cables that you get in the box. The MSIs are also going to come with their own cables in the box. Even for competitor models here, we still support some of the adapter cables, you know, for competitor products too. So a much more streamlined, simplified system in terms of the adapters. A new look, a lot of new features and functionalities, which actually brings us to the Quest trolling motor. I think one of the biggest things when you look at building a brushless trolling motor is it's not just a matter of taking a brushless lower unit and putting it on the trolling motor. If you are going to that type of design, and what Minn Kota is building as far as the most powerful trolling motors available on the market, is you have to re-engineer it from the bottom up. There's a lot of differences in terms of the design that had to be re-engineered. If you look at the Tarova that's on display right there, in terms of the thickness of the base plate, I mean, it's a hugely built design from I'm not sure if it was a 1/4 inch base plate to basically a 1/2 inch right now. The motor shaft, a carbon fiber reinforced shaft, is actually a thicker diameter. Everything about the motor, the steering housing, all of that is basically redesigned. Even the bolts that are being used to mount the trolling motor on the deck are actually a larger bolt. Because of the amount of force, because of the amount of torque that a brushless Quest trolling motor is putting out, like I said, you can't just take a brushless lower unit and put it on the trolling motor. You're going to have problems with it being able to withstand, you know, and handle all of that force and torque that's applied to it. So it is a completely different design in terms of the functionality and performance and everything that you're getting with it. So we'll talk about some of these features down in some of the other slides here, but here's some pretty cool designs. So here's some of the differentiations. I mean, motor longevity, I mean, that's great. You're going to have a motor that's going to last even longer, but you know, I think some of us have already still seen, even now to date, there's still a lot of those old black and white head Minn Kotas out there. I don't know, 765 MXT, whatever the case is, they last a long time to begin with. This is really just going to take it to the next level. Minn Kotas last a really long time. So efficiency, power, thrust, torque, the prop. You get the 2 props in the box, you know, with the Quest trolling motor. So if you're, you know, pitching in the weeds or fishing a little bit more in the slot, where I'm from, I do a little bit more bass fishing, right? So having the weedless wedge prop, pretty good thing to have. However, the power prop is another option that you can get, particularly when you're pulling blades, cranking, things like that. That's more of an application where you're going to want to maximize your power and efficiency, especially for open water applications and so on. So as far as I'm concerned, in that case, I would just put the power prop on and, you know, not look back. So, but the fact that you do get the 2 options is pretty cool to maximize the functionality of the trolling motor. They are very quiet. If you turn that trolling motor on right now and crank it on high, like, you will not be able to hear it, okay? Real-time battery monitoring. I'll show you another image, you know, down the road here where you can actually monitor your battery system, especially for a tournament application. You're fishing a certain way, you want to be able to tell, well, this is the way that we need to fish. Are we going to be able to have enough power at the end of the day in these 3-footers or whatever the case is to be able to get us through the rest of the day before we got to go into weigh-in? Having the ability to monitor your battery system is really, really cool. No performance loss. Check this out. As the battery voltage drops, there is no performance loss in the motor, similar to what you get in a lithium battery. So at the start of the day to the end of the day, until the battery is essentially done, you're gonna have the same amount of performance. That's a pretty big feature that you're gonna get with that. Here's the battery monitoring system. All this is a software update that you're gonna get when you do the software update with your Humminbird unit. It'll have this as another screen view, and it's gonna provide a lot of great information from your battery percentage, your voltage, the time remaining, how many hours you have left, or it'll say here, time left to empty. While at 8:07 p.m. type of thing, you're gonna be done. So if you figure this is how we're fishing, this is what we need to do in these conditions, we gotta make sure we have enough power till about 3:30 p.m. Yep, no, we're fine, right? So when you go into the settings, you would actually set the type of battery and a few other little programs that you can plug in there, and you can optimize it for the type of system, voltage, battery type that you're using. So this is a pretty cool feature, specific to the Quest trolling motors. You're also going to see that these have a one boat network button. So again, whatever you want to designate as one of the one boat network functions, you can basically just tap that on the foot pedal. So you want to engage your drift mode, you designate that as your drift mode, tap it on the foot pedal, you're good to go, right? And these are just some of the letterings. So when you look at your DSC dual spectrum chirp, you already know MDI, mega down imaging, mega side imaging. Some of the trolling motors, depending which particular model, might be designated a WR, which is the wireless remote. That's the full-size wireless remote that you saw in the previous slide there, as well as the micro remote. Some of the units might have a micro remote. If yours happens to be a model that comes with a full-size WR wireless remote and you want to get the micro remote, you can absolutely do that, or vice versa. So if you have a micro remote, but you want to have the full functionality of the full-size remote, you can do that as well. I won't go into this in detail here, but this basically just shows some of the features and functionality that you're going to get with even from the basic power drive system, because those are using the new enhanced GPS. So whereas power drive never had, let's just say, iPilot Link, although we're not using that terminology anymore, you are getting the functionality of the enhanced GPS on a motor that never previously had that type of technology, being the new system. Same thing goes with the Terrova. You have the Terrova features and then the Quest model only features, right? So if you're looking for the highest performance, features, and functionality that Quest offers, that's an option. Now there is an upcharge, right, to get into the Quest series because of the differences that you're getting in that type of product, but you don't necessarily have to do that. We still offer the non-Quest series, and for a lot of people, that definitely fits the bill. Same thing for Altera, and you'll also notice, although it's a little bit hard to see, when you look at some of the models here. So here's the Altera models, 80 pounds, 112 pounds, DSC. That basically means that that particular model in those shaft lengths, the transducer that's built into the lower unit is going to be the DSC, or dual spectrum chirp transducer. If you're going to be using imaging, for example, MDI, there's the same models that are available with the built-in mega down imaging transducer. When you get into the Quest series, you've got DSC, and then what you notice is that they have MSI. So MSI is exclusively reserved for the Quest series trolling motor. Now granted, you may not necessarily use mega side imaging off of the trolling motor because of course you want to have that trolling motor, in a straight line. Once you start turning it, that beam's going to start getting, a little bit swirly and, distorted on you. That's why I actually prefer to be using mega side imaging off the transom, and then what I'll do is I'll network that signal to the front unit. So whenever I want to use mega side imaging, it is off the back of the boat. I'll just put the motor in high gear and then I'll get my imaging that way. But if you do want to have full functionality from the transducer to have mega side imaging at the bow of the boat, you can certainly do that with the Quest motors if you're using imaging. Even if you're not using mega SI and you have a DI model, you're going to get that with the MSI transducer. So if you want to have imaging and Quest, it'll have the MSI transducer. The other difference you'll notice here is that, check it out, 90/115, 24/36. It's the same motor. So the 24 volt motors and the 36 volt motors are basically the same thing. All you need to do is decide what transducer you want on it, which shaft length you want on it, and it's the same thing from 24 to 36 volts. So maybe you're rigged up for 24 volts. And it's like, well, I'm thinking of getting another battery, maybe moving up to 36, but I'm not really sure. While previously, like if you're running a non-Quest system or with some of the older motors, you kind of have to make that decision. Because if you have a 24 volt trolling motor and you want to go up to 36, Well, you got to get a whole new trolling motor. The great thing about Quest is, well, if you decide down the road that you want to go to 36, you've got that extra battery to network it, or sorry, to connect it to a 36 volt. There you go. Now you got a 36 volt system. You wire it for 24, you got a 24 volt system with 90 pounds of thrust. You wire it for 36 volt, you've got a 36 volt system with 115 pounds of thrust. So that's kind of a neat thing with the Quest trolling motors. I remember years ago I ran into a situation in a tournament when I was running the 3 batteries in series, and for some reason, I mean, I could just tell there was some performance loss. And it wasn't just a matter of it being later in the day, but something just wasn't really working right. So when I tested the batteries out, it turns out that one of my battery was shot. It just wasn't holding the charge really good. So in that case, what I can do is basically just disconnect that 3rd battery, rewire it to 24, and then you have full performance, 24 volts, 90 pounds of thrust in a pinch. So that's pretty cool. And of course, 90 pounds, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's still lots of power, right? So the other thing you'll notice is with the quick release brackets, when we're talking about brushless motors, specifically the Minn Kota Quest series, again, you can't build that type of trolling motor and not build it up to the specs that it is. That's why the trolling motors actually weigh more. Could we have possibly built it lighter and skimped on corners and use the same bolts and all that? Well, sure. But that's not how we do things. Same thing goes with a quick release bracket. When we're talking about that type of performance, those types of demands with the torque, you can't use the same quick release bracket, right? The other thing is that, of course, the hole patterns, the bolt size is a little bit different. But if you happen to look, I think one of them is around here somewhere, actually just back there. If you take the aluminum slide mount that we have from the previous model, we still support those. So if you're running a non-Quest trolling motor, we still have those quick release brackets available. But if you're running a Quest trolling motor, you do have to have the Quest specific quick release bracket, okay? They are more expensive, but when you actually hold one of those things, and you can check later, I mean, it is massive, it is heavy, it is just a total different redesign. Why? Because that's what you need. Could we have built a lighter, cheaper bracket? Sure, but not in the way that we actually do things. You need that type of bracket. You need those types of materials. You need that type of build if you want the motor to last and perform how it should be. We also do offer a deck reinforcement plate too. So depending how you have it rigged, if you want to reinforce that deck even a little bit more, that's an option as well. And of course, we are talking a different beast, right? We're talking the Quest brushless trolling motors. So that could be a consideration depending how your deck is actually built up on the boat. Straightforward with some of the designs, from the non-Quest motors to the additions that you get with the Quest motors, from eco mode. I don't remember, did I mention the eco mode? I think I might have actually forgotten about that. The slide that we had with the battery monitoring system, which like I said is a great feature. One of the things that will happen is that when the battery drops to 20%, a prompt's gonna come up on the screen and it's gonna ask you if you wanna kick into eco mode, okay? Just like in your vehicle where you kind of have your standard mode, or your sport mode, your eco mode. All that eco mode does is it basically drops the sort of performance back to the non-Quest or the non-brushless performance, okay? Which we already know that. I mean, even the standard Minn Kota motors, or all the motors up to date, I mean, they're pretty darn powerful as it is. So all you're doing is you're taking the Quest brushless performance, dropping it back to the non-brushless performance, and it's going to save you a little bit of power, okay? So you have that option to conserve some of your power, or maybe it's the case where you go out to the cabin for the weekend. Typically what you do is your batteries are charged before you leave your house. Maybe you don't have a way to charge your batteries when you're out there. As soon as you get back home, you're going to plug them in and you're going to charge them, okay? So there's different cases like that that might come up. Maybe towards the end of the weekend, it's a little bit nip and tuck if you're going to have enough power to go fishing on Sunday afternoon or something like that. Well, the great thing is in a case like that, or if you're unsure about for the duration of the trip that you're going to go on, I mean, just run it at eco mode, right? You're going to save some of your battery right there just by actually selecting the eco mode and letting it run that way. So having the ability to select it for the application you're using it for, it's pretty cool. All right, we're going to do a little bit of a recap on some stuff. I mean, inevitably down the road, I'm sure we're definitely going to see some new Humminbird stuff coming down the road. As I mentioned when I started off, this is the year for Minn Kota. One of the things that has been updated, especially when you're networking your Ethernet connections, is the Ethernet switch or the Ethernet hub box, whatever you want to call it. So the previous version, the 5PXG, which anytime you run into more than 2 Ethernet connections, you got to use the Ethernet switch, right? So maybe you've got a few head units, maybe you're running, Mega Live previously with iPilot Link, those are Ethernet connections. But eventually, as technologies evolve, you start to reach the hardware limitations of what that can do. And then especially when you're running multiple, I'm talking, 4+ or 5 head units and all that, you're going to start reaching some limitations as far as what that hub is going to do. For the most part, if you're running a few Humminbird units, maybe iPilot Link, Mega Live, I mean, the 5PXG is going to work perfectly fine. It's in those cases when you really start loading it up, which is why we have the new 5PGL. It can handle all of that. Kind of like when you get, I don't know, I'm just picking something out of the air, maybe a new modem box or something like that, gig speed, all the different things that they market. Well, again, you reach the hardware limitations of what that can do, so you got to get the new hardware upgrade in order to have that, data transfer rate. With the new 5PGL, the great thing is especially when it comes to networking and troubleshooting, right? Maybe you have some network issues or you're trying to determine, well, is the box getting power? What's connected, one of the Ethernet cords, is it actually working? Well, when you connect the power, you're going to get a green light or you're going to get a light. It's going to let you know right away if that Ethernet box is actually getting power. When you have your unit on or whatever you're using and you connect it to the box while it's powered, you're going to get a light. It doesn't matter whether it's orange, it doesn't matter whether it's green, it'll be one of those two colors depending sort of the transfer rate of whatever it is that you have plugged in. So the color doesn't mean anything. The main thing is that if there's a light on, it's working. So when you're trying to troubleshoot between the network actually being connected, well, you got to go through that process of elimination, right? You got to start unplugging Ethernet cables. Okay, run this back to back in and of itself. See, is it working? Okay, yeah, it's connected, it works. Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. With the new 5PGL, it can handle, all of those technologies and things that you have plugged into it. Mega Live, multiple screens. You can piggyback hubs together, especially when you have a lot more peripheral, plugins. But you can see at a glance whether it's working and whether each channel is actually working and communicating that data. So that's a pretty neat update. Interestingly, the price on the new 5PGL is actually a few dollars less than, the 5PXG. So technology evolves a little bit, right? This is a little bit more of a refresher. When you look at some of the Humminbird technologies with side imaging, mega side imaging sonar, I still use side imaging sonar a lot, right? When you want to cover ground, when you want to get a lay of the land, you just put your boat in drive, have your side imaging on, and you're going to be able to cover a lot of water. It's not even about necessarily finding structure or brush piles or fish or that sort of thing. It's about finding those changes in bottom, those transitions, right? That you can see really, really clearly on mega side imaging. Same thing goes with down imaging, right? That area directly below the boat, especially when you have your 2D sonar on and then your mega DI right beside that. The great thing is especially as you're trying to interpret your 2D sonar, is mega down imaging is going to help you in what you interpret on your 2D screen a lot better, because I've seen it a lot of times being in the boat with someone where you see little bumps on the bottom. Oh, there's a fish, and I'm thinking, I think that's actually a rock. Sure enough, when you see it on the MDI screen, you look and you can actually see the rubble on the bottom there, right? So those technologies are still relevant. Another tool in the box, of course, Mega 360, right? That mega technology. Just like with side imaging, you get that lay of the land perspective, but the great thing with Mega 360 is you don't actually have to be moving. Right? You can be at the bow of your boat, you can be scanning an area. This is an awesome tool, particularly for ice fishing, right? You can isolate your sweep area, you can widen the area of coverage. Typically what I'll do for Mega 360 is I'll usually run it from 80 to 100 feet. You can run it further out, but then you're trying to compress all that stuff within a wider area of coverage. The lesser area that you have it zoomed out to, the more sort of zoomed in you're gonna have it. Here's a few screenshots. These are actual screenshots that I took from Lake Winnipeg from some previous trips, and you can see there's no structure here, right? It's just a flat bottom. There is nothing going on. So it's not about seeing rocks and structure, although you absolutely can, and there certainly is structure in Lake Winnipeg. When you're drilling your hole, when you're trying to find fish, the classic way of doing it is you drill a hole or you drill 50 holes and then you drop your transducer down the hole. Maybe you're running a flasher unit back in the day. You fish for a little bit. Maybe you see something on the screen. Maybe you don't. You fish for 15 minutes. Okay, nothing here. You move on to the next hole. But again, you're drilling a lot of holes and you're covering a lot of ground and you're spending a lot of time doing that. With Mega 360, you don't have to do that. You drill one hole. You drop that 360 pod down the hole. Once it refreshes, when you see that on the screen, I mean, these are sizable walleye right here, and you can see some of the bait fish in the water column. There's a lot going on. If I'm fishing Lake Winnipeg and I drill a hole and I see that, I'm fishing. If I drill a hole, I drop it down and I see nothing, just a blank bottom, why would I bother fishing it? So the amount of time that it actually saves to find and locate fish on whatever body of water is huge. Another example that I'll show you here is, check this out. You see down at the bottom here, you see these two fish. I'm just going to go to the next slide and you'll see how they move there, right? So as that refreshes, I'm just kind of toggling back and forth. So from here to here, maybe you start picking up where it's like, it seems like the fish, as they're traveling, they're kind of going in this direction. So if I'm kind of keeping that in the back of my mind that, okay, the fish are kind of going from here and they're following the contours of the shoreline and they're going in that direction, when things slow down and I don't see anything on the screen and we're not seeing fish on the sonar and we're not catching anything and it's time to move on, where am I going to move to? Probably in the direction that I saw the fish move to, right? So again, another cool bit of information. Now keep in mind, what I see on the screen and what you're going to see on your sonar unit is going to be a lot clearer than what you're seeing on the projector here. But what you're going to notice here is that these two fish, you can actually see, and again on the screen I can see it really clear, but sometimes what you can see is you can see the shadow. If that shadow is right beside the fish, you know that those fish are tight to bottom. If there's a bit of separation, you can tell if they're suspended. So a lot of times I'm actually looking for that sonar shadow, because that helps you kind of differentiate where, particularly if there are some rocks on the bottom, and then in the next picture, because the fish are typically going to be moving. As it refreshes and you see, okay, in the last 5 minutes, that little white torpedo there, it hasn't moved, well, you know it's a rock, right? So depending on the settings, depending on the structure, the contrast, sensitivity, usually what I'll do is I'll typically have my sensitivity around 12. I usually leave it pretty close to default, but I will bump it up a little bit. I don't play around with contrast all that much, but just something that's going to give you a crisp image. What I would look for is, if you see something that looks of interest, is just note if it changes. Now keep in mind, you can also cursor over and you can zoom in on those spots too. And here's another example here. I mean, there are some fish right here. You can see those little grains right there. But this is an example, again, just moving over a little bit from those other spots, there are these, kind of anomalies here, these, little bit of structure on the bottom there. And I've got other images where you can actually see rocks and, limestone and stuff like that on the bottom in Lake Winnipeg. But, of note is you see that little scour right there. I'm assuming what that probably is, when the ice goes out, because it's not particularly deep here. I mean, 9 feet, I mean, there's a lot of ice shelves that get a lot bigger than that. It's probably when you got a ridge and it tips up and all that and the ice moves, that's probably what that is right here. So it just actually goes to show the detail you can see. I also have some other images where right near the mouth, where, I mean, we're literally only in about 3 feet of water and it's just a big sandbar. And when you're kind of walking on the beach, you get that scalloping on the beach, right? You can actually see all the little ripples and scallops and stuff like that in the sand on 360 imaging in very, very shallow water. And those fish that show up, particularly in that shallow water, you can see the big shadows beside them and stuff. It's pretty cool. So the detail that you're going to get with Mega 360, is pretty neat. But as something that gives you that lay of the land, to cut down your search, this is a great tool because, like I said, one hole, let it refresh, and you pretty much have an idea if you're going to be fishing there. Some of our outfitters that are using this technology, they'll tell us that typically where, it'll be so many hours in the day where they're actually trying to find fish, never mind if they're scouting for their clients, okay, the fish are in this general area, they can basically just go on the ice and punch a hole here and there and then just start marking waypoints as to, yeah, the fish are around. They used to be here, they were there yesterday, but now they're all hanging around here. That's pretty amazing. And in fact, they actually said that they're saving about a half day's pre-fish time or a half day, in actually finding the fish, so they can move around a lot quicker. So anyway, it's just another technology I wanted to spend a little bit of time on to give you an idea about forward-facing sonar live imaging. And I mean, it's certainly a technology that really has changed the game in terms of what it shows you. When we first started doing some of the videos here, in fact, the first trip that I did, with Humminbird Mega Live was over here with the folks at Pokies, and we went out on the Capel chain there, and we, it was one of my first times of actually using it and playing around with it. So one of the things I was talking about at the time are the clarity, detail, and simplicity. And even from the first time that we had Mega Live, this still very much holds true. So when you look at some of these images, and these were actual screenshots from a couple years ago on those trips, on that trip. So I'm not even using new images here. These are some of the original images. And one of the things we talked about is that edge-to-edge clarity, right? You don't get that coning or segmentation, ghosting, that sort of thing. So this is pretty cool. That was one of the things that set it apart, right? Was that clarity that you get edge to edge. It really is just a matter of adjusting from your sensitivity and your contrast. Many of the issues that I do find that some people run into is they're kind of chasing the settings, you know, without realizing what one setting does. So they might take their contrast and then they crank it one way without realizing what it does, and then they take their sensitivity and they crank it another way, but the image doesn't look good, so they drop that one down and crank it up, and again, they're kind of going like this. Typically what I will do is I'll basically drop a lure down, or if I'm fishing vertical, or I'll just drop it down. I'll set it based off my lure, right? You get that baseline. As long as I can track my lure, you know, I'm good to go. I set my sensitivity accordingly, and then what I'll do is I'll adjust my contrast to where I just start seeing sort of that, you know, clutter, whatever you want to call it, in the water column, and then I'll back it up a couple notches, and then I'll just tweak my sensitivity. Once it's set, it's set. There's really nothing else that you have to do. One of the great things with some of the latest softwares with Mega Live, and the software update process is pretty straightforward, but in all the different variations in the evolution of Mega Live from when we first released it to where it is now, is that how much does a software update cost, right? Zero. So particularly a lot of the more current software updates, as it improves the detail, it improves the range, it improves the clarity, all of those updates into where Mega Live is right now, there's no cost to that, right? So it's pretty neat to be able to do that, and the fact that we actually don't use a black box, that firmware is actually pushed to the transducer because the, you know, computing is actually in the transducer, so kind of a unique system. But anyway, at the end of the day, you know, a clear system, but also the detail. These are those same original images from that trip. It's even better right now, right? You can check and see, well, there you go. You want to see dorsal fins, you want to see tails, I mean, it's all right there. Look at this. I kind of took this image, you know, from online, and you can see, there you go. I mean, there's that fish turning. So it certainly has the clarity, it has the detail, but still, one of the things that is undeniable is also the simplicity, right? You've got the transducer, you have two cables. You have a power cable and you have your transducer, which is your Ethernet cable. That's it, that's all, right? Especially for an ice fishing application, when you have your portable shuttle, right? Your battery in the shuttle, and you have your pole and your transducer. Very simple, compact type of system. One of the things I will say, regardless of the mode, like the forward, you got landscape, you got down mode here, is that, and I remember doing a video about this a little while back, but one of the things that I will say is that when you're using it, because I have seen some people, you know, when they talk about, well, I can't really track my lure properly, or it's in down mode and I'm not really seeing fish and I'm only in 20 feet of water, you know, that sort of thing, is that if you look at the beam profile, so let's say this is the pole right here, okay? From the pole to where that transducer is mounted on the pole, it's not really a 50-50, you know, type of spread with the pole. It's actually pretty sharp, you know, kind of a straight down, or maybe 5 degrees or so, but it's pretty sharp on the pole side, and then it actually kind of flares out towards what I call the front face of the transducer. What's actually really important is that when you're using it in down mode, so let's say I'm fishing right here, okay? I'm facing the screen, I've drilled the hole right here. This is the hole that I'm fishing out of. I drilled another hole just ahead of the hole that I'm fishing out of. I've got the pole down it. The transducer is facing me. So it's in down mode right now, angled down, and it's facing towards me. It's actually really important that when you're using it in down mode, that you have that transducer face angled towards you. The reason is because if the beam basically is sharp on this side and it flares out on the other side, sometimes what might happen, depending the settings, you notice when you go into the Mega Live settings and how you have that transducer mounted, there's sort of port and starboard side. Well, the default is starboard side. Let's say you've got a hole drilled here, you've got lines off to the side right there. You pick up the rod on the right, but then all of a sudden you see it rise on the left side of the screen. So what's kind of the natural thing to do? Well, I'm just going to take the pole and I'm going to spin it around. Well, now what you're actually doing is you're fishing behind that beam, right? You're on the peripheral of that beam, particularly if the angle of that pole is off a little bit, or you're fishing a little bit deeper. So instead of doing that, you always want to make sure that that face of the transducer is angled towards you. That's actually really important to know when you're using it in down mode, particularly for ice fishing, okay? So adjust your settings as you need to, but make sure that face is actually angled towards you. This is more of an introduction to, you know, Lakemaster VX. This will be something that you're going to see happening down the road. Like I said earlier, it's really no secret, you know, with, you know, as we start expanding the surveying, Humminbird Lakemaster, you know, 1-foot contour details. Imagine fishing Last Mountain Lake top to bottom and having the entire lake mapped, you know, 1-foot contours. That'll be a pretty awesome thing, right? certainly open up a whole new world of, knowing all the structure and detail that there is there in Lakemaster, surveyed 1-foot contour detail. So in the not too distant future, you will see a Humminbird product, for Saskatchewan that will have a number of Saskatchewan lakes, both surveyed high definition 1-foot contour lakes, as well as standard definition lakes. So although they weren't surveyed by us, they are still a standard definition, from acquired sources that are going to give you a good baseline, right? A good base map, okay? Lakemaster VX has some awesome technologies because it's a vector map compared to the previous version. When you zoom in all the way on the contours, they can get a little bit jagged or pixelated type of thing. For those of you that might have used the Manitoba map, maybe fishing Lake of the Prairies, the contour detail is still the same, but the technology that you get with Lakemaster VX really is actually next level. So there will be a couple different options, be it the standard map or the premium. For the difference in the price, the Lakemaster Manitoba Premium I think is $269. The non-premium is $199. The difference that you get with the premium charts here is that you do get the shaded relief color palette, which is an additional color palette, as well as shaded relief. You'll see that in the next slide, that it actually adds shading to the contour relief. It almost looks 3D-ish in a way. It's not, but it just adds a lot more texture and detail to the contour, as well as you get aerial imagery. I really like having the aerial imagery because it's not just about, well, I don't need aerial imagery on land. No, there's aerial imagery on water, okay? So for example, if you want to adjust your transparency on the map, be able to see through the water because maybe there's some rock piles where you want to see the docks, or maybe you're fishing a clear body of water where you can actually see through that, depending the sampling of the aerial imagery, and you'll be able to see the sandbars and the reeds and the rocks and all that sort of stuff. So imagine having that on your Humminbird screen where here's your boat and here you are fishing a reed edge or a weed edge, and you can actually see those weeds sticking up in your boat position. Pretty neat stuff, and I'll show you some examples of that. So in this particular slide here, this is actually up at Hecla Island, up in Lake Winnipeg. So this is with the contours. This is the same image right here. All I did is I just removed the contours. So this is really just illustrating what shaded relief is. Again, it's not 3D by any means, but it kind of gives you that texturing of having that shaded relief, just that much more detail to the map when you combine that with the contours right there, and you can actually adjust the intensity of that shaded relief. Sometimes on those sharper break lines where, the blackout of the shaded relief kind of overpowers the contour lines, well, you can adjust the intensity of that, right? So again, the customization of that is pretty amazing. Selectable color palettes, right? So depending what your preference is, maybe you like the good old classic AutoChart Live color palette. Well, that's a color palette that you'll be able to select there. VX technology, built-in Smart Strike. This used to be a separate product where you would buy a Lakemaster card and then you could also buy the Smart Strike version of that card. Well, Smart Strike right now is automatically built into Lakemaster VX. Well, what is Smart Strike? Basically what that is that you kind of get further down the rabbit hole as far as some of the parameters that you can, punch in there, but you basically select your species, your time of year, your watercolor, all these different sorts of things. And right away I can see it, right? People are like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Maybe a few grins, it's like, okay, I'm not going to use that. Well, here's the thing, you don't have to use that, but I have used it, and there are actually applications where it's like, son of a gun, okay, that's pretty cool. Whether you're fishing a new body of water, okay, again, it's a springtime, you're fishing for walleye, it's clear water, the wind's at this speed, coming from this angle, all these sorts of things you can plug in. It takes those parameters, it plugs into the unit, and then it's going to basically, pull out those spots where, in theory, that's where those fish should be. If you're on a new body of water, doesn't hurt to try those spots, especially if you have nothing else to go by. I have used this pre-fishing in a tournament situation where, based on the pattern that we were actually fishing, I plugged in those parameters into the unit and it showed me spots, and believe me, in Lake of the Woods, this area that we were fishing, I knew the area very well, but it showed me other areas that I hadn't really considered, and it's like, oh, okay, well, let's go and check it out. Sure enough, we actually caught fish there and we weighed in a couple of fish from those spots. I otherwise would not have even considered going there, but it just so happened. So you don't have to use this, but this is a pretty interesting technology. And it's built in. It's a standard feature. So this goes into the difference where the field eventually kind of gets leveled, where everybody has high definition mapping. The difference really comes into the Lakemaster technology, even some of which I haven't even mentioned yet, right? So you've got your chart presets. The chart presets are actually very cool, and I'll show you an example on the screen so that what you can do is you can customize specific chart presets, from a user preset to a fishing preset to a navigation preset. The best example I can think of is that when you're navigating certain bodies of water, and there's a lot of islands, Lake of the Woods is a perfect example. It's great having all of this detail, right? The routes and the contours and the markers and but it almost gets a little bit too much for some folks. So what they might do is they might toggle back and forth between a standard base map. Now you're gonna lose a lot of detail, and then when they're fishing, they'll revert back to their high definition map. Well, the great thing is with having a chart preset is you can go into your menu settings, you can adjust the color palette. Maybe you prefer to have that classic paper map color palette. Maybe you want to get rid of your aerial imagery, right? Maybe you want to take your contour density and drop it to a low contour density versus a high 1 foot contour density. Maybe you want to change the contour colors. Whatever you want to do, you can go in and customize that map view so that now when you're going to drive, maybe you're in Kenora and you're driving from Kenora down to a friend's cabin or whatever the case is, maybe you've never been on the lake. You set it to your navigation preset that you basically cleaned up. Now it looks like a more standard base map. When you're fishing, you've got all the bells and whistles and everything that you've set it for. So having a chart preset is pretty cool. Your depth highlight, Lakemaster VX, you don't just have one depth highlight. If you're catching fish in 12 to 14 feet of water and you set that as a depth highlight, everything in that depth range is actually going to show up. That's a pretty cool feature, especially when you start patterning fish. Well, the great thing is what happens if that's great for the morning bite when those fish are in that depth range? What happens when they move like 22 to 24 feet or something like that? Well, you can actually set multiple depth highlights and you can customize the color that you want those highlights to be. Shallow water highlight. Now, when I'm using Lakemaster VX, typically just because of the color palette, because I am using the shaded relief color palette, that red or shallower color palette's already highlighted. So I'm typically not using that, but that is an option. You can set from 0 to 6 feet, 0 to 8 feet. So at a glance, that shallow water is going to be highlighted for you. So shaded relief, aerial imagery, water level offset. This is a really big thing because a lot of bodies of water, it can fluctuate. Your depth can fluctuate from the spring of the year to the fall. You're fishing the Red River for catfish in the spring is going to be a lot different than fishing them in the fall. Lake of the Prairies is another thing, right? You're fishing, just, I don't know, south of Dropmore on the west shore there, and you kind of have those picnic table sized rocks there that are going to make you have a really bad day if you don't know that they're there. What if the water level drops by a couple feet or something like that? Now, if you're using a map that has, this is what the depth is for the lake, well, that's fine, but what if conditions are different where that rock that is 6 or 7 feet that you can drive over all of a sudden is 2 feet or less, right? So you're thinking, yeah, we're in the clear, we're good to go. But then all of a sudden when you hear that bang, things aren't going right, right? So the great thing is that you can adjust your water level offset. What I typically do in that case is I'll launch the boat on a flat spot, I'll look at the depth on my screen, and then I'll look at the depth on my map. Whether it's up or down, I'll adjust accordingly. Most of the time I won't change it all that much unless the depth has actually changed more than a couple feet or so. But you have the ability to adjust your water level offset for the current conditions. That's not only going to change the contour shading except for the shaded relief color palette, but all the other color palettes are going to change the contour shading and the depth numbers are going to change. Maybe it was a 3 foot reef and now you've dropped it by 4 feet, let's say. So now that 3 foot reef is actually going to be, the first contour is actually going to be land. So it's an awesome technology that regardless of whoever has what for high definition mapping, these are all of the Lakemaster features and the Lakemaster VX features. It's pretty amazing. This just happens to be, and of course, I mean, I can't even read that, so I know that you can't. But when you look at all the lakes that are offered, Manitoba, we have, I think it's over 100, HD surveyed bodies of water, and then a lot of standard definition lakes. So in time, when we do have a Saskatchewan product and we're not too far away from it, we're going to have a bunch of bodies of water, that are available that have actually been surveyed. Particularly a lot of the main ones around here that I'm sure you can guess are going to be high definition Lakemaster surveys with all the features and functionality that we talked about. So pretty cool stuff. I will show you, actually I'm going to come back and show you on the screen here. Same thing goes with the new One Boat Network app that I talked about earlier. So all the Lakemaster functionality. Right now, if you purchase one of the Lakemaster VX maps, you're going to see a voucher in there that you can redeem for a year's subscription. Now the app is free, okay, and so far as downloading it and using the remote functions. But when it comes to the charts, if you are fishing in Manitoba or some of the areas that currently do have, Lakemaster VX mapping, it's a subscription based, I think it's $31.99 or $32.99, somewhere around there. And it's a subscription for the year. Previously, with Chart Select, if you were to download just the South Basin of Lake Winnipeg alone, like that would alone be that price. So imagine having for a nominal fee and an annual subscription, access to all of the Lakemaster VX maps that are available in Canada, because this is Lakemaster Premium Canada, in Canada, right? While it gives you US, but you can purchase the US regions separately if you want to have the premium features and functions. So when you go into the settings here, let me just see right here. So if you look at Lakemaster chart, select Lakemaster VX Premium Canada Inland. Yes. So depending, while it will have a lot of the base maps as well too. So depending which one you have, but if you want to have the Canadian Premium, that's going to be that specific subscription. So all the features and functions and color palettes and customizations and adjustments that you can do on the app. I mean, imagine, if we, with our previous chart select system, some folks would say, hey, when are you going to add Lake of the Woods to it? Well, imagine what Lake of the Woods alone would cost for that type of, acreage of coverage, top to bottom, Lake of the Woods. Everything that is available on Lakemaster VX Mapping Canada is actually available on the app. So all of Lake of the Woods is on there, Lake Winnipeg South Basin, all of the other lakes that you saw on that. So in time, as we expand it and add more lakes, these are going to be available on the One Boat Network app on the chart setting there. You could be sitting in your kitchen, looking at Last Mountain Lake, checking things out, marking waypoints, all that sort of stuff. So that's going to be pretty cool. So the app really does supplement a lot of the functionality that you're going to be able to have on your Humminbird unit now. Let me just show you a quick couple things here. So this just happens to be an area on Lake of the Woods. So I'll show you right here. Remember what I said about your presets? So I'm just going to go up to, so this happens to be an Apex unit, but the same features would be available, of course, on Helix and Solix. So right here is your chart preset. This is your layers. So if I go to my chart preset, here's a good example, Lake of the Woods. There's a lot going on, right? Awesome detail, your shallow water, your deep water, your contours, you've got your marker buoys, everything is on there. But understandably, if you're not used to it, as you're navigating, it's like, man, it's a lot going on, right? So maybe you want something a little bit more standard and basic. So what I actually did is I set up my navigation preset right here. I kind of simplified it. So all I did is I just toggled to my navigation preset. There you go, okay? I could zoom in, I can do whatever, but check it out, where you still have your routes, you still have your markers, but I have the paper map color palette, because that's just what I happen to select for this. You can select whatever color palette you want. I got rid of the aerial imagery, and it's a lower density contour interval. So you actually don't have to toggle back and forth from a base map or from one map card to the next. All you gotta do is just adjust your presets, right? Maybe I might wanna have, because maybe I like my AutoChart Live color palette, right? So I can use that as a color palette, get rid of the aerial imagery. Or if I want the whole enchilada, what I can do is I can go to my user preset here. This is what I've selected for the 2D shaded relief, all those features, functions, aerial imagery, just amazing detail. So any of the areas, that have Lakemaster VX coverage right here are gonna have, so imagine that, there you go, all of Lake of the Woods there and that type of amazing detail. I want to show you something as it relates to the transparency layer. I'm going to show you on this lake here because it happens to be a clear lake, hence the name Clear Lake. Let's go up into this section of the lake right here. This is what I was talking about when I mentioned the transparency layers, right? So if I wanted to go in, amazing detail. Like I said, I can go into my settings. Watch what happens when I go to my layer transparency, and I'm just gonna drop that down. So what do you see here, right? I can still see my contours. I still have some coloring of the map, but check that out. You see all of that? This is all sand right here. These are all actually the weed edges and pocket. And it's funny how, check this out. What do you notice? These weed edges, how they actually coincide with the relative depth of that lake. Now I can zoom in and I can get even a little bit more detail. In fact, let's go to this area right here. And you can see on the screen, you should be able to see, so there's a dot here and a dot here. Those are the marker buoys, letting you know that that reef is actually there. Now, if I want to take it even a little bit further, what I'll do is let's take it and drop it all the way down, right? So now essentially what you're looking at is an aerial imagery, a Google Earth type of imagery, right? Imagine being on the water and you have this type of transparency but still having the map detail. Maybe I still want to see the map, I want to have a little bit of transparency. You can blend it, have a little bit of both, right? So it's not just about high definition contour detail, it's about all of the Lakemaster VX functionality, aerial imagery, 2D shaded relief, selectable color palettes, chart presets, depth highlight, shallow water highlight, water level offset, smart strike, gotta take a breath, and much more, right? So some pretty cool stuff right there going on with this mapping. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a teaser that this is going to be happening, you know, at some point. I don't know exactly when, but in time, you know, in the not too distant future, there will be a Saskatchewan product where you're going to see this Lakemaster VX mapping out in, you know, this part of the world. So we're pretty excited about that. Anyway, I'll stick around for questions, but, you know, certainly if you have any questions, fire away. But I really appreciate the time. Always look forward. Thanks so much to Pokies. Always look forward to coming out on this trip and meeting you all and chatting. And so thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.